She came back after 8 years and ruined everything. Hi everyone. I never thought I'd be here, telling the internet this story. But sometimes, speaking out loud is the only way to heal. And maybe, just maybe, someone listening might feel a little less alone in their own journey. My name is Rachel. I'm 30 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been the stepmother to two amazing, and at times very complicated, teenagers. Twins, Jason and Lily. They were 10 when I married their father, Andrew. I knew from the very beginning that blending into their lives wouldn't be easy. Their biological mom had left them, and Andrew, when they were barely toddlers. For a long time, they didn't speak of her, and I never pushed. Andrew and I met at work. He was kind, grounded, the kind of man who felt safe. I fell in love with the way he talked about his kids, protective but proud. And when we got serious, he said something that stayed with me. They don't need another mom. They just need someone who won't leave. So I didn't. I showed up for the piano recitals. I drove them to soccer. I learned how to braid Lily's hair off of YouTube because she once mentioned missing it. I was there, day in and day out, and slowly, they stopped calling me Rachel and started calling me Mom. That moment, hearing it for the first time, I cried. In private, of course. I didn't want to make it a big deal, but to me, it was everything. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I just wanted them to know I was never going to be another adult who walked away. But everything changed last year. It was a regular Thursday when Andrew told me. We were finishing dinner, the kind of meal where the kids barely look up from their phones, and the only real conversation is about homework deadlines. And he just said it. Melissa reached out. I froze. I hadn't heard that name in years. Melissa, their mother, the woman who vanished one day and never came back. No birthday cards, no calls, nothing. A ghost. She wants to reconnect with the twins, Andrew said. She's moved back to the state. She says she's sober now. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was furious. How dare she just show up now, when we had finally built something solid? Another part of me was scared. What if the kids welcomed her with open arms? What if they pushed me aside? But I swallowed all of it. I just nodded and said, okay, let's talk to the kids. We sat them down together that weekend. Andrew did most of the talking. He explained that their mom had been struggling, but now she wanted to make things right. Jason blinked, stunned. Lily asked one question. Why now? Neither of us had a good answer, but I watched their faces shift, from confusion to curiosity to something I couldn't name. And then they agreed. They wanted to meet her. So we arranged it. A public park. A sunny Sunday afternoon. I stayed home that day, and when they came back, everything was different. That night, they were quiet. Too quiet. They didn't tell me anything about what she said, or what she looked like, or how they felt. The next day, Lily didn't call me Mom. She said, Rachel, like it was nothing. And that was the beginning of the end. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers are moody, rebellious, conflicted, especially when something as big as a long-lost mother reappears in their life. I told myself to give them space, to let them figure it out. But it didn't stop at Lily calling me Rachel. Jason started doing it too. Then came the rolled eyes when I asked them to clean their rooms. The muttered comments under their breath. The passive-aggressive silence at the dinner table. It wasn't just indifference anymore. It was coldness. And every time I turned to Andrew for support, he looked away. I don't want to push them, he'd say. They're going through a lot. I was going through a lot too. But no one seemed to notice. Then came the day Jason called me something I'll never forget. I had asked him not to bring food into the living room after I found a soda spill on the couch. He stood up, looked me dead in the eye, and said, You're not even our real mom. So why don't you stop pretending? And then under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear, he muttered a word I will not repeat here. A slur. A punch to the gut. I stood there frozen, the soda can still in my hand. My heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. Andrew walked in just after. I expected him to say something, to take a stand, but all he did was glance between us and say, What's going on? Jason shrugged. I didn't speak. And Andrew, he let it go. The next time I saw their biological mother, Melissa, it wasn't planned. She showed up at our house one Saturday afternoon. I had just come home from the grocery store, balancing bags in both hands, when I saw her standing on the front porch, laughing with Jason and Lily. They looked so happy. So at ease. She turned to me and smiled, as if we were old friends. Hi, she said casually. You must be Rachel. Something in the way she said it felt like a dig, like I was just a placeholder, finally being dismissed. I forced a smile. Yes, I'm Rachel. She didn't thank me for raising her kids. She didn't ask how they'd been. She just tilted her head and said, I hope we're not intruding. I thought it was about time I showed up. Jason ran past me without a word. Lily followed. The doors shut behind them. I stood there with grocery bags digging into my fingers and my dignity falling apart at my feet. Later that evening, I asked Andrew why he hadn't told me she was coming. She just asked if she could stop by, he said. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Not a big deal. I repeated, my voice shaking. She left for 8 years, Andrew. She vanished, and now she just gets to walk back and like nothing happened. He rubbed his face. She's still their mom. I'm their mom too, I said, louder than I meant. I've been here, every night, every school form, every stomach flu, every tear. He didn't respond. That silence said everything. The next day, I sat the twins down. I told them that I loved them deeply, that I wasn't trying to replace anyone, that my love wasn't conditional or a competition. Jason didn't even look at me. Lily said quietly, she's our real mom, and you need to stop pretending you are. That night, I cried until my pillow was soaked, not just because they hurt me, but because they didn't even seem to care that they had. I tried to keep going, tried to smile through it, tried to pretend like this was just a rough patch that love could fix. But something had changed. The warmth in our home had faded, replaced by cold glares and muttered words. The twins stopped saying goodnight. They stopped telling me how their day went. And Andrew, my husband, the man who once held my hand through everything, now barely looked up from his phone when I entered the room. Still, I held on to the one thing that I thought might bring us back together. The Disney trip. We had planned it for months. I had the itinerary saved. I booked the hotel, bought matching shirts. I thought, maybe if we get away, laugh together, escape the tension, maybe we'll find each other again. But 3 days before the trip, I overheard something that finally broke me. Jason was on a video call with Melissa, his biological mom. He didn't know I was in the hallway. He laughed and said, yeah, I don't even care about Disney. She's not my mom, anyway. Why should I pretend to be happy around her? I froze. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the words, it was how easily they came. That night, I told Andrew I was canceling the trip. He didn't even ask why. He just shrugged and said, probably for the best. No, are you okay? No, let's talk. Just apathy, like I was an inconvenience. And that's when I realized I was done pretending. The days after I canceled the Disney trip were a blur. I stayed in the house with Andrew, but it felt like a shell of the place I had once loved. I moved through the house like a ghost, trying to avoid the fights, the cold silences. The tension was thick, unbearable, and every day, I felt a little more like I was losing myself. I spent hours reflecting on my life, and slowly, something inside me clicked. I didn't deserve to be treated like this. I had given so much of myself, my love, my patience, my heart. And for what? To be dismissed, ignored, and humiliated by people I had given everything to? I wasn't the villain here. I wasn't the one who had done anything wrong. I had been a good stepmother, a good wife, and in return, I had been abandoned, disrespected, and betrayed. It took me weeks of agonizing over the decision, but eventually, I knew what I had to do. I packed my things, not all at once, just a few items here and there, trying to make it look like nothing was happening. But every time I grabbed something, a shirt, a picture frame, it felt like I was taking back a small piece of myself. I told Andrew I needed space, that I needed time away to think about what I wanted, what was best for me. He didn't stop me. He didn't even seem to care. That night, I locked the door behind me and drove to my new apartment. My heart raced as I walked through the front door of my new place. It was small, but it was mine. There were no arguments here, no passive-aggressive comments, just me, alone, in a space where I could finally breathe. And then, I took the biggest step of all. I filed for divorce. I never thought I would be here, but after everything that had happened, I realized I wasn't the same person I was when I married Andrew. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked into that house, full of hope and excitement, ready to build a family with him. I had changed, and I needed to change my life, too. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like some movie where everything is wrapped up in a neat bow. The legal process was long and difficult. Andrew didn't fight me for the divorce, but he didn't make it easy either. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying things like, "You're just throwing away everything we built." But I wasn't throwing it away. I was reclaiming myself. I was alone in the sense that I was no longer married, no longer living in the house that had once been my home. But in that solitude, I found strength, and I was more determined than ever to move forward, rebuild, and create a life that was truly mine. The weeks that followed my move into the new apartment were some of the hardest, yet they were also the most transformative. I had all the time in the world to reflect, and though I spent many nights crying into my pillow, I knew deep down that I was on the right path. Being alone didn't scare me anymore. It was liberating. The weight of the years I'd spent sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of my marriage had been heavy, but now, without Andrew and the constant strain of family drama, I was beginning to find peace. Planning solo adventures, I had always dreamed of traveling, but had always put those dreams on hold, for the kids, for Andrew, for the idea of family. But now I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted. So I started planning my first solo trip. I didn't have a specific destination in mind yet. but I knew it would be somewhere far away from everything, somewhere I could just be myself, without the burdens of the past weighing me down. I began with small adventures. A weekend trip to the mountains, just to get out of the apartment and breathe some fresh air. I booked a cozy cabin by a lake and spent my days hiking, reading, and finding peace in the simplicity of nature. It was incredible. The serenity of the outdoors was everything I had needed to clear my mind. Every step I took toward independence brought me closer to rediscovering who I really was. I had been so wrapped up in playing roles, wife, stepmother, caretaker, that I'd lost sight of myself. But now, I was reclaiming my sense of identity, one adventure at a time. Buying my first house, I had always dreamed of owning my own home, but I never thought I'd do it on my own. I imagined buying a house with a partner, starting a family, growing old together. But life had other plans, and so, I decided to take the plunge. I saved up my money, made the necessary arrangements, and found the perfect little house in a neighborhood I loved. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, and that meant everything. The day I signed the papers and officially became a homeowner was one of the happiest days of my life. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the bare walls and empty spaces, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel empty. I felt empowered. This house was a symbol of everything I had been through and everything I had overcome. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I began to understand that my journey wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the twins too. I had always cared deeply for them. I had raised them, loved them as my own, and had been there for every milestone, every tear, and every laugh. Even though things had soured and the distance between us had grown, I couldn't erase the bond we once shared. The idea of completely cutting them out of my life felt impossible, but I also had to protect myself. The emotional toll had been too much. Setting boundaries, the first thing I realized was that I needed to set clear boundaries. Boundaries that allowed me to still care for the twins, but without sacrificing my own mental and emotional well-being. I stopped trying to force myself into their lives. I didn't want to be the person who begged for attention or validation. Instead, I reached out when I felt it was necessary, letting them know that I was there for them, but also reminding them that respect had to go both ways. I called them once a week, checking in on their lives, asking about school and how they were feeling. It wasn't much, but it was my way of staying connected, of keeping the door open while still protecting my heart. Rebuilding trust with the twins over time, the twins slowly started reaching out. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but I could feel the shift. It was clear that they were conflicted. On one hand, they had their biological mother back in their lives, and they were processing the years without her. But on the other hand, they were trying to figure out what they really wanted and who they really wanted in their lives. Their mother, as expected, was making the situation more difficult. She had made it clear that she wanted to be the primary figure in their lives, and in some ways, she was using that power to manipulate the situation. But I couldn't control that. What I could control was how I responded. I began to realize that the best thing I could do for them was to give them space to heal. I couldn't force them to accept me, and I couldn't pressure them into feeling the way I wanted them to feel. They needed time, and they needed to come to their own conclusions. Personal growth and rediscovery. This entire journey had forced me to grow in ways I never expected. When everything fell apart with Andrew and the kids, I was devastated. But as time went on, I began to see that this was a period of incredible personal growth. The pain, the heartbreak, the tears, all of it had pushed me to confront who I really was, and it had forced me to reclaim my power. I had spent years giving everything to others, trying to be the perfect stepmother, the perfect wife, the perfect caregiver. But in doing so, I had lost sight of myself. Now, I was learning how to put myself first. I was learning how to set boundaries, to prioritize my own happiness, and to rediscover the things that made me feel whole. Finding peace in the silence, there were still moments of doubt. Moments when I felt like I had lost something irreplaceable. The family I had once dreamed of was no longer the same. But I found peace in the silence. I began to embrace the idea that sometimes healing doesn't come from the noise of others. It comes from being able to sit with yourself, to listen to your own heart, and to find your own peace. Moving forward with hope as I look to the future, I no longer feel burdened by the weight of the past. I've learned that sometimes letting go isn't about giving up. It's about creating space for something better. While I'm still figuring out what the future holds, I know one thing for certain: I am enough. I am worthy of love, of respect, and of happiness. And I will continue to build my life, step by step, with confidence and faith. As time continued to move on, I found myself in a place of quiet reflection. The pain, the heartbreak, and the disappointment that had once consumed me were slowly being replaced with a sense of strength and clarity. I had made it through the storm, and I had survived. Learning to letting go had been the hardest thing I've ever done. There was a time when I would have done anything to hold on to my family, to try and make everything right again. But I learned that sometimes, in order to grow, we have to let go of what no longer serves us. My relationship with Andrew had been built on love, trust, and shared dreams, but somewhere along the way, it had crumbled. And as much as I wished I could go back and fix it, I knew that the best thing for both of us was to move forward separately. It didn't mean I loved him any less. It didn't mean I was giving up on family. It just meant that I was choosing to prioritize my well-being. In the silence that followed, I began to rediscover my purpose. I spent more time doing the things that brought me joy, things I had forgotten about during the years I'd spent focused on my family. I started going back to the hobbies I had put on hold. I began writing again, journaling about my experiences, my feelings, and my dreams for the future. I took walks in the park, spent weekends exploring new places, and took time to truly listen to myself. Through it all, I realized something important. I had the power to redefine my life. I didn't have to be defined by my past mistakes, my failed marriage, or the heartbreak I had experienced. I could build something new, something that was uniquely mine. One of the most important lessons I learned during this time was the power of self-compassion. For so long, I had been my own harshest critic. I had blamed myself for everything that went wrong, convinced that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worthy of love or happiness. But in the quiet moments of reflection, I realized how untrue that was. I was enough. I always had been. I began to treat myself with the same kindness and compassion that I had always shown others. I forgave myself for the mistakes I had made, and I accepted that I was human. I had tried my best, and sometimes, things don't turn out the way we hope. But that doesn't mean we're failures. It means we're learning. As I continued to heal, I found myself gaining more confidence in who I was. I had spent so many years adjusting to the needs and expectations of others that I had lost sight of my own desires. But now, I was taking control of my life. I enrolled in courses that I had always wanted to take. I started traveling more, visiting places I had always dreamed of exploring. I began to create a new vision for my future, one that was full of possibilities. And with each step I took, I felt myself becoming more and more aligned with who I truly was. Looking ahead, I see a future filled with hope. It may not look exactly like what I had imagined years ago, but it's mine, and that's something I'm proud of. I've learned that life doesn't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean we can't find beauty in the unexpected. It doesn't mean we can't create something wonderful, even after pain and loss. I've come to believe that sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that push us toward the best versions of ourselves. This is a new chapter of my life, one where I'm not defined by anyone else's expectations or decisions. I am free to be who I am. I am free to create the life I want. And while it may take time to fully heal from everything that has happened, I am no longer afraid of the future. I am ready to embrace it. To anyone who's been through a similar experience, I want you to know this. You are not alone. The road may be difficult, but there is always hope. You are stronger than you realize, and you have the power to heal, to grow, and to move forward. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel lost, but never forget that you are worthy of love, happiness, and peace. You can rebuild your life. You can create a future that brings you joy, and you can do it with grace, with strength, and with the belief that better days are ahead. As I began to find my footing and build a new life, I realized something important. My story wasn't just my own. It had the potential to help others who were facing similar struggles. The pain I had endured, the lessons I had learned, and the strength I had gained, it all had value beyond just my personal experience. I had always been a private person. For years, I kept my struggles to myself, thinking that the world didn't need to know what was going on behind closed doors. But as I started to heal, I began to feel a calling to share my story. I joined support groups for women who had gone through similar experiences. I started attending therapy sessions, not only to heal myself, but to learn how to better help others in similar situations. I started writing blog posts, speaking at community events, and even creating content for social media, all to share what I had learned along the way. The more I shared, the more I realized just how many people were going through the same thing I had. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. And that realization brought a sense of peace. It gave me the courage to continue sharing my story, knowing that it could make a difference. One of the most profound lessons I learned was the importance of empathy. I had spent so much time feeling isolated, but as I connected with others, I realized that we all carry pain, and sometimes all we need is someone who understands. I became a better listener, offering a listening ear to those who needed it most. I learned that sometimes the most healing thing we can do for others is simply to be present and to show that we understand. That's what had helped me the most. knowing that someone else had walked the path before me and survived. As I began to help others, I noticed how my own healing accelerated. Being there for others became a source of strength. I found that the more I helped others, the more I helped myself. Helping others gave me a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond just surviving. I wanted to create a positive impact in the lives of those who were going through similar challenges. I started offering advice and guidance, helping people navigate the complexities of relationships, parenting, and self-discovery. I worked with a counselor to develop strategies for those facing similar struggles, and I became a mentor for women who were rebuilding their lives after betrayal and heartache. I poured my energy into empowering others to reclaim their identities, set healthy boundaries, and find the strength to move forward. I realized that this was my calling, not just to heal, but to help others heal as well. In sharing my story, I found my voice. I had spent so many years trying to be everything to everyone, silencing my own needs and desires in the process. But as I began to speak up, to share my truth, I felt an incredible sense of liberation. It wasn't always easy. There were times when I felt vulnerable, when I questioned whether my story would resonate with others. But each time someone reached out to tell me how my words had helped them, I knew that I was on the right path. One of the most challenging aspects of my journey has been forgiveness. It's easy to hold on to anger and resentment, especially when we feel betrayed. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing the wrongs done to us. It's about freeing ourselves from the chains of bitterness and allowing ourselves to heal. Forgiving Andrew, and even his family, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I did it, not for them, but for me. Forgiveness has been a liberating experience. It has allowed me to release the weight I had been carrying and to move forward without the burden of anger. And in doing so, I've found peace. Looking ahead, I feel a sense of excitement and hope that I hadn't felt in years. The past is behind me, and I've learned to embrace the future with open arms. I've learned that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and sometimes, the path we thought we were supposed to walk leads us somewhere entirely different. But that doesn't mean we can't find joy in the journey. I've built a new foundation for myself. I've found joy in my own company, and I've rediscovered my passions. And I know that this is just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in my life. Through all of this, I've come to understand that family isn't just defined by blood. Family is about the people who love you, support you, and show up for you, no matter what. While my relationship with the twins has been complicated, I've learned to find peace with it. They are part of my story, and I will continue to support them in whatever way I can, even if it's from a distance. And as I continue to grow, I've learned that the most important relationship I need to nurture is the one with myself. I am my own greatest advocate, and I am worthy of love, respect, and happiness. As I reflect on this journey, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I've learned, for the strength I've discovered within myself, and for the people who have supported me along the way. Though the road hasn't been easy, I wouldn't change a thing. Each step has led me to where I am today, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I am proud of the woman I've become, and I'm excited to see what the future holds. If you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. The journey may be hard, but you have the strength to make it through. Take it one day at a time, and remember that you are worthy of love, peace, and happiness. You are capable of rebuilding your life, and the best is yet to come. As time passed, and I continued to navigate the complexities of my new life, I began to realize that the pain I had endured didn't define me. What defined me now is my resilience, my ability to pick myself up, and the strength to move forward. Every challenge had taught me something invaluable, and though I could never forget the heartbreak, I no longer allowed it to control me. The decision to step away from the marriage and file for divorce was the hardest one I had ever made. But once I made it, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by a relationship that was causing me emotional harm. For the first time in years, I felt free. Freedom didn't come without its struggles, of course. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned if I had made the right choice. But then, I would remind myself of all the reasons why I had taken this step. I had to reclaim my peace, my identity, and my happiness. I began to focus on the small victories, the days when I woke up feeling strong and determined, the moments when I could smile without any lingering sadness or anger. These little victories were the foundation of my new life. One of the most important lessons I learned throughout this journey was the importance of self-care. For years, I had prioritized everyone else's needs over my own. But in the aftermath of my divorce, I realized that I couldn't pour from an empty cup. I had to take care of myself first. I started setting boundaries, learning to say no when I needed to, and taking time each day to nurture my body and mind. I began exercising regularly, eating healthier, and spending more time outdoors. I meditated and practiced mindfulness, allowing myself to stay grounded in the present moment. Self-care became my form of self-love, and it made all the difference in my healing process. One of the most difficult aspects of this journey was the impact it had on my relationship with the twins. Although things had been tense between us, I still loved them deeply. They were still a part of my family, even though the dynamics had shifted. I had to accept that their relationship with me would change, and I needed to give them space to process everything that had happened. I tried my best to be there for them, even if it was from a distance. I respected their need for time and space, but I also made sure they knew that I would always be there for them when they were ready to reach out. I also made an effort to rebuild my relationship with my own family. I had become so focused on my marriage that I had neglected my own family. Now, I was making up for lost time, reconnecting with my parents, my siblings, and my friends. It was a beautiful reminder that family, in whatever form it takes, is a source of strength and love. This journey of self-discovery wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about embracing the woman I had become, a woman who had endured pain, but had emerged stronger and wiser. I began to understand who I truly was outside of my roles as a wife, mother, and stepmother. I was not defined by my past, but by the choices I made moving forward. As I looked ahead, I realized that I had the power to create the life I wanted. I didn't have to settle for anything less than what I deserved. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I was no longer afraid. I had faced the darkest moments of my life and emerged victorious. Now, I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Perhaps one of the most important steps in my healing journey was learning to forgive myself. For so long, I carried guilt. Guilt for not being able to fix things. Guilt for not being able to make the marriage work. Guilt for the pain I had caused my children and myself. But I realized that holding on to that guilt was only hindering my progress. I forgave myself. I forgave myself for the mistakes I made, for the things I couldn't control, and for the moments I wasn't proud of. In doing so, I gave myself the freedom to move forward without the burden of shame or regret. The future feels bright. There are still challenges ahead, but I'm no longer afraid to face them. I've learned that life is a journey of ups and downs, and it's how we respond to those challenges that truly defines us. I'm building a new life, one where I am free to be myself. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm thriving. And with each new day, I grow stronger, wiser, and more confident in who I am and what I deserve. Although I had stepped away from my marriage and filed for divorce, I began to question what relationships would look like in my future. I had loved deeply and been hurt deeply, and that was something I would never forget. But I also knew that love, in its purest form, was something worth pursuing. This wasn't about jumping into another relationship to fill a void or to prove anything. It was about healing, rediscovering trust, and understanding that love, when it comes, must be built on mutual respect and shared values. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to entertain the thought of love again, not with urgency, but with patience. I had spent so many years focusing on others that I had forgotten the most important relationship in my life, the one with myself. I began to set healthy boundaries, learn how to communicate better, and understand what I truly needed in a partner. I no longer sought validation from someone else, but rather, I learned to validate myself. I was no longer afraid to ask for what I deserved: respect, trust, and affection, without sacrificing who I was for the sake of a relationship. In the past, I had been so focused on being a wife and stepmother that I had neglected some of the most important relationships in my life. My friendships, especially with my sisters. We had always been close growing up, but over time, life had gotten in the way. I had put my family first and often pushed my own needs aside. Now, with more time and space for myself, I reconnected with my sisters. We spent weekends together, talking, laughing, and sharing our struggles and triumphs. They were there for me in a way that no one else could be. They reminded me of who I was before the marriage, the woman full of dreams, laughter, and strength. I began to understand the importance of having a strong support system, especially during tough times. As much as I had suffered, I never stopped caring about the twins. I never stopped loving them. They had been a huge part of my life, and I wanted to be there for them, even if things had changed between us. I gave them space. I let them know that I wasn't giving up on them, but that they needed to come to me when they were ready. I respected their need for time, but I remained available, patiently waiting for them to reach out when they were ready to reconnect. I also spent more time focusing on the bond one had with my biological children. I wanted them to know that I was always there for them, that no matter how hard things got, I was their mother, and nothing would ever change that. The process of healing, of rebuilding relationships, was slow, but it was worth it. Every small step forward meant the world to me. Perhaps the hardest thing I had to do was learn how to trust again. Trust had been shattered in my marriage, and I had spent so many years wondering if it was possible to ever truly trust another person. I had been betrayed by the very people I loved the most, and the pain ran deep. But slowly, as I learned to trust myself again, my instincts, my decisions, my ability to stand up for myself, I realized that trust wasn't something to be given away lightly. It was something that had to be earned, and it was something I had to offer willingly. I began to trust again, not in a desperate, vulnerable way, but with careful intention. I took my time getting to know people and allowing them to prove themselves worthy of my trust. And as I did, I felt my heart open up again, slowly but surely. One of the most important steps in my healing process was finding peace with my past. I had been so focused on the pain and the betrayal that I had forgotten to look at the bigger picture. I had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't change the past. The choices my husband made, the actions of my stepson, and the mistakes I had made were all part of my journey. They had shaped me into the woman I was today, and as much as I wish things could have been different, I knew that I couldn't live in regret. I chose to let go of the anger and the bitterness that had held me captive for so long. I chose to forgive, not for them, but for myself. Forgiveness was the key to unlocking the peace I so desperately needed. Now, as I look to the future, I see endless possibilities. I am no longer defined by the pain of my past. I am no longer bound by the expectations of others or the mistakes I've made. I am free. I am free to be the woman I've always wanted to be. A woman who loves herself, who knows her worth, and who is ready to embrace the future with hope and excitement. The road ahead may not always be easy, but I am confident that I will face whatever comes my way with strength, resilience, and grace. I know now that I am enough. I am worthy of love, peace, and happiness. And as I continue on this journey of self-discovery, I hold my head high, knowing that the best is yet to come.